remember that book being in our launch meeting and just being so excited, even hearing about it. And the read was thankfully even better. But I will say it was one of those books that I so instantly loved and also was like, how do you explain this book to someone? It's the one line pitch can be really confusing if you're like, well, a mom turns into a dog at night, and the different nuances happening there. So it was a book I loved immediately, but I knew it was going to be a bit complicated to try to translate what was so special about it. Thankfully, the cover that they ended on was really wonderful, and that helps a lot in publicity, especially when pitching a book, because I can't tell you how many books with plain white covers that I've had, and trying to get that into a magazine is pretty difficult. So that was a huge help. But yeah, I loved the book immediately and knew I wanted to work on it. And yes, also knew that it was going to be a struggle to try to make it a success during that very weird time frame after COVID. We hit a really odd period in the publishing world in 2020 because everyone started reading like crazy. It was everyone locked in at home and people were ordering books nonstop, and it was amazing and so special to see. But it also meant that, my part of the job, the publicity, the getting people to go to events, the helping people connect to a book was 10 times harder and really different than it ever been before. I will say, I think specifically with Nightbitch, we saw such a focus in 2020 on the changes in parenting during that time and when everyone was at home. And I think a lot of people were losing their minds, not just parents, but that was a really great angle to try to get media attention that wasn't just, another headline about what a difficult time it was, but trying to find this silver lining of, you know, everyone is looking at parenting in a different way right now. And here's a book that is fictionalizing a lot of those things that people are feeling and can maybe even help people understand those feelings in a different way. So it was a really weird, chaotic storm. And I think it helped and hurt the campaign in a lot of ways.
What are some specific kind of like publicity things that you designed or kind of set in motion that would kind of navigate that? First of all, just the weirdness of the pandemic, but also really kind of like supporting the book as something that could help us get through it.
Yeah, so this actually is not unique to COVID. There's been a number of different periods in my career where there is something going on nationally or globally that really changes the media landscape. We've feel like we've had a really wild past 5 years just in America. So this is not the only time something like that has happened. And I think as a publicist, that is a moment where you really have to be extra thoughtful about what you're doing. So I specifically for Nightbitch, I wanted to take this work of fiction and have it help people who were going through, really different struggles than they probably ever had before in their parenting. So what I had to look at was, okay, this is not going to be right now for a media outlet that is mainly giving us really hard, difficult news. I need to pivot this to outlets that are going to be trying to move away from that. So, for instance, Bustle had its kind of outshoot Romper, which was like the millennial parenting company. And that's perfect for something like this because they don't want to be reporting on, the hard, devastating topics. They want to be drawing away and be giving a different kind of view on what's going on.
I am curious, as we've moved kind of out from the center of the pandemic, um, around which there's a lot of talk about how everything was going to change. And I think everything, of course, did for a while. But I wonder how much of your job, I mean, you kind of have a career around it. How much has that returned to some sort of pre-pandemic normal, or have certain things just kind of like stayed with the discoveries that we made during the pandemic?
So the area that it impacted the most for sure was events. I said, tours, I don't know if they will ever be what they were before 2020. I think that a lot of publishers used to be um, a lot more amenable to sending authors out on tours, even if that meant these events weren't huge successes. I've been to events where there's six people in the audience of three, and three of them are family. So it's not saying that before 2020 all book events had a huge crowd, but our willingness to send an author out was very different. And when we had to transition to virtual, the virtual events, there was a period where we did feel like people were logging on. And then we quickly found a period where people did not want to be on their computers after being on their computers all day at home. They wanted to try to get outside, even if they couldn't go be with other people, as opposed to sitting at their desk for another 2 hours and watching an author on Zoom. So book events changed a lot. And when we started to kind of do them again, it's been a really interesting period to watch. Initially we were doing outdoor events like for Nightbitch. Rachel really had a huge hand in setting up an outdoor event with Prairie Lights Bookstore in her hometown, and getting to still do that, even though it wasn't, probably the book launch event that she had envisioned when she wrote this book. So we did a lot of events outdoors. We did a lot of events with masks and different procedures. And I'd say that it's a new normal now.
How did this work specifically for Nightbitch? Was during the pandemic, was it different to try to get reviews, or since everybody was just reading, there was a kind of explosion of people going like, well, I'm going to order a bunch of books because I'm stuck at home. Was it more feasible just in that window of time to get more reviews?
I think a big difference in terms of media coverage was the interview process. We for NPR interviews, we used to actually have people go into studio to record those face to face. And that changed a lot during this period. Thankfully, NPR switched to doing those predominantly over the phone. They have like their own app that they needed you to download and use. But the fact that we were able to change that was a huge difference. And honestly, a really big help. I've had authors in the past where we would book an interview like that, but I had them on tour in a different state, or, in somewhere that it didn't make sense. So it was a help and a hinder in a lot of different ways.
It seems to be a kind of cult following almost. I don't know, I don't use that in a pejorative sense at all. But I mean, people really connected to this book. There was one person who had a question after the conversation had been conducted. And I asked her, I thanked her for a question after the event was over. And I said, oh, do you work around here? And she said, no. I had left work and drove straight here from St. Louis. It's like that's a 2-hour drive to get there. And she was very into it. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit what it was like to kind of see that develop, even though the events were different than they would have been in a non-pandemic era. Were you kind of like seeing this happen in real time? And if you were, like, how does that kind of affect the next part of your role as a publicist? Do you kind of, is there a way to kind of leverage that to reach even more readers?
Yeah, so I feel like the cult following of the book is usually something that we know is happening. I mean, for me, my sign is always when my mom will ask me if I've read a book, and I'm like, oh yes, I'm working on it. That's usually my first sign. But no, usually I feel like the cult following, when you get those feelings, it will be after publication. Because as said, a lot of my job is making sure that at that pub date, there's as much in the media and news as possible. But when it's 4 or 5 months after a book has published and I'm, getting a request from a media outlet for a copy of it, or we're, seeing an odd spike in sales for who knows what reason, that's usually when we have a tip off that there's something happening. And especially, marketing handles all of our social media, and they'll see a surge there, especially, and looking at their data of, impressions on social media posts that we have about a book or something like that. But the way that it kind of works in the publicity realm is that when we start to see that uptick happening again, when I'm out of the blue getting requests for a book, that's usually when we can say, okay, is there enough of a surge right now that I can use this to try to go get actual media hits again? Can I get this author on a, morning talk show 6 months after the books come out? So it is really special to see that happen. And I definitely think it makes a really big difference in marketing. When we see a cult following like that happen, often that's when there will be discussions to, okay, should we go back to the marketing budget and add more now so that we can build on this cult following and run ads where we're seeing it happen?
And I would imagine that a similar thing happens when you learn that a book has been not only optioned, but actually being made into adapted into a screenplay and a movie.
Yes, yeah. And I can tell you, I've worked on a lot of books that have been optioned for movies and TV shows, and I can count on one hand how many of them I've actually gotten to see come to fruition. So it is super exciting when we actually see like a movie poster or a trailer or something happening. But for on the publicity side, when we kind of see things starting to generate with a studio, we will usually work with them to align in media hits. So there's obviously, publicists for that studio where they want to have a piece and deadline and they have their own contacts there, but we'll work with them as well so that I can then, try to do out a new round of pitching to my media contacts with like, look, this was just announced in Variety. This movie is coming on, November 2024. Do you want an interview with the author before that happens? So yeah, it's an exciting thing. It's even more exciting when it actually becomes a movie or TV show.